Good morning. So from the roads, we are walking in time, actually ahead of time. Come the 17th of this month, which is barely 48 hours from today, the National Fund for the Disabled is going to be marking its 40th anniversary. But how has been the journey so far? At a time when matters of, persons living with disabilities have become very rife. However, perception hasn't changed when it comes to are we still including persons living positively actually in as far as the policy making table is concerned, or do we still see them as not part of the general society? How do we change that perception? To take us through that conversation is none other than Dr. Mike Kiswili, who is a trustee of the National Fund for Disabled of Kenya. Karibu, sir.
Thank you so much for having me in this show.
So 40 years, come Friday, we are walking in time. How has been the journey in a nutshell? And maybe before you tell us about the journey, just help us understand, what does the National Fund for the Disabled of Kenya actually do?
Thank you so much for that question. The National Fund for the Disabled of Kenya came into existence 40 years ago. That's 1981. But the journey started in 1980 when the head of state, then the late President Daniel Arap Moi, formed a task force to go around the country and also raise funds for the disabled. This came about because 1981 was the UN year for persons living with a disability. So at that time, the whole country came together. They brought in resources and they raised about 20 million shillings then, which of course was a lot of money. And the time they were doing all this fundraising from all corners of the country, at least there was a lot of sensitization. And they came together at Uhuru Park and the money was raised. And then there and by there, the National Fund for the Disabled of Kenya was founded.
Good. So that 40-year journey, when you look back at that 40-year journey, as you said, 20 million shillings then was quite a lot of money. Let's look at in terms of financial stability and disability as a challenge. What would be your comment about that?
It is unfortunate. For many years, our society has always looked upon people living with disability as a liability, particularly during those early years. But I'm glad to say that since then, the perception, the attitude, and the way they are being treated has changed a lot. Today, they are being assimilated to the normal part of the society. And thanks due to lobbying, a lot of advocacy from the disability sector, and also the legislation and the positive steps taken by the government of Kenya. One of them is like the Persons with Disability Act 2003, which brought in a lot of privileges and a lot of, entitlements which were enshrined in the law, and also the Constitution. One of them is today they are able to participate in the government procurement. There is at least 30% that sector. There is also, the way we construct our, houses, the way we do our buildings, and generally inclusivity. Inclusivity in the sense that today you find a lot of disabled people who have got a voice. So the government has done a lot since then. But I can say that way back in 1980, they are being looked upon as if really it's a taboo to have somebody who is disabled in the family.
These are some of the milestones that you've mentioned, but are there missing links? Do you think we can do more, especially not just looking at government, but also within the private sector?
Within the private sector, yes, a lot can be done, and a lot has been done. Today, you find that the society is more receptive, and the private sector has come up, to not judge the people living with disability through their disabilities. No. The private sector takes them as any other person. You go to school, you've got talents, you've got skills, you've got all that is required to do what you're supposed to do. And so there's less discrimination, more opportunities, And the private sector is also supporting the government towards that.
So from where you sit, Dr. Rie, here you're saying at least we have come of age where there are equal opportunities for persons with living with disabilities, so to speak.
Yes.
Now let's talk about the history book that has documented this 40 years history. What is contained there? I would want to understand, as a person, an avid reader, I'd want to know what is contained in this history book.
The 40 years history book traces the beginning of the National Fund for the Disabled. Not only the National Fund for the Disabled, but also how has that sector grown? How was the perception grown? I will start with the National Fund for the Disabled of Kenya. You find that we started with only 20 million shillings. We bought Rehema House in the CBD, just behind New Stanley. And the trustees who were appointed at that time, they were so visionary. Instead of distributing the money between counties or districts by then, they said, let's invest in this money, become some sort of endowment fund where we can be able to assist both individuals and also institutions. Then from there, over the years, we also grew another policy aspect where we also started lobbying, trying to advocate for the people living with disability, their rights, their privileges, and really even the perception that we had in the public. Through that, like I said, we had the Persons with Disability Act. Then 10 years later, another Rambe was done by His Excellency, the late President Daniel Arap Moi. Another 29 million shillings, that's 1989, was raised. And we bought the second property, New Rehema, in Westlands. The idea was to make sure that we are independent in the sense that we continue to fund our mandate. We continue to fund those causes which we believe are useful to the people living with disability. Also 10 years, I beg your pardon, 10 years later in 1992, out of the proceeds of those two properties, we bought another third property, which is Rehema Place along Gung Road. And recently, just a year ago, we bought another one. So when you look at it all in all, we have seen growth in that sector. Also inclusivity. In our board, you've got people who are disabled. One of them is a prominent lawyer, Honorable Josephine Sinyo, and also in the staff and others like that. So we have seen tremendous change.
So how do you tap into these monies that you have invested? How then do they trickle down to persons living with disability? Is it open, or does one have to be, how does one benefit in essence?
I would say that money, because the trustees are guided by the policy of empowering persons living with disability, both socially and economically. We collected rent. Currently, we are collecting about 200 million shillings. And we also work alongside with the provincial administration, the present national government administration officers, GAO, who identify people who are living with a disability. And they also identify the disability and they identify their needs. And through that process, we try to allocate per county to make sure that we reach the nation as a whole. So we distribute that money in terms of, say for example, individuals. We try to empower them economically. We buy them income generating tools, machines, equipment, like for irrigation, for carpentry, for electricals and things like those ones. Also institutions, we also identify institutions which are serving people with disabilities, particularly schools. You find for a long time, these schools had been not given as much attention like the normal schools. You find they don't have dormitories, they don't have, laboratories, and so we have gone into that. Currently, we have assisted 151 schools, worth about 300 million shillings all over the country. At least every county, every year, we try to fund one school. So within those 10 years, we have funded 151 schools.
Is it contributory? Is it open to the public to contribute to this particular fund?
This is not contributory at all. We have a website where people living with disabilities can be able to access it. They are able to decide what they want to apply for. We fund it 100%, And every year, because the head of state is the patron, we always, our accounts are audited, we present them to the president, and we also publish those financial statements in the daily, in the dailies every year.
Now, as you mark your 40th year celebrations, what are your expectations of this particular fund?
Looking forward, we want to see more collaborations. We want to see more change of perception. Because a person living with a disability really is not different from me or you. The only difference is that he couldn't be having this or other, just like some of us have got ailments. People could be having high blood pressure, others could be having other diseases like diabetes, and they are limited. It's only this one could be physically or
identify.
Yeah. Something that you can see from there, or maybe vision impairment. But apart from that, these people are no more people, and we expect that going forward they'll be given the opportunity that they need, like another Kenyan. And thank God, at least the Constitution is so clear on that. The Persons with Disability Act is so clear on that. The government is doing a lot, the private sector is doing a lot, and that's why we are seeing ramps everywhere. So going forward from where we are now, we need more collaborations, we need change of perception, and we need more participation and inclusivity for people living with disabilities.
Dr. We are headed into the election period. What is your take in terms of inclusivity? As you've said, inclusivity, especially where we are making the decisions at the policy table. What is your comment in the current representation that we have, especially, in arms of government that are calling the shots, so to speak?
In my own personal view, I think a lot more can be done. There's a saying that says within that sector, there is no decision that should be taken for disabled people without them being involved. And I think that is very, very important. Also, the way we measure their performance, the way we have their expectations has to change. Which means that really, when you talk about security, people living with disabilities, they need more security during this polling time so that they can contest freely. And I think that's very, very important as we go into politics.
Persons living with disabilities should be making their decisions about themselves, not the other way around. Inclusivity.
Inclusivity, absolutely. And we are seeing more and more of that, but I still believe a lot can be done towards that direction. And I think what we need to do is the 5% representation, which is there in the law, should be implemented and should be observed. That way, then we are able to make sure that where we are, they are also there.
So good on paper, it has to be put in practice. So in a nutshell, as we come to a close of this conversation, what do we look forward to from this fund in the next 10 years? You've given us a breakdown of what has been done, at least 10 every 10 years.
Currently, like I said, we are celebrating 40 years tomorrow.
True.
The head of state has graciously agreed to grace that occasion. Tomorrow at KICC, starting at in the morning section, and we also urge as many of them as can to come and participate in that.
That is Friday, right?
It's Thursday tomorrow.
Oh, Thursday.
Yeah, tomorrow.
Because the communication we received was that it's going to be happening, yes, at the KICC, but on Friday.
There's a change. There was a change.
Okay.
So you're right in a way.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So it is tomorrow.
It's tomorrow. Yeah. So tomorrow we are all gathering out there to celebrate 40 years. But in going forward, we want to make sure that the 40 years don't just change. We are moving away from relief, from sympathy, and all that to where we empower them. And in the process of this empowerment, we also want to bring them on board so that they can be able to decide their own destiny.
Very well said. So tomorrow, save a date, and the venue is going to be the KICC, where the National Fund for Disabled in Kenya is going to be having the 40th anniversary there, and the patron is none other than President Uhuru Kenyatta. Is going to be, be with them this day tomorrow, just to look at the milestones that they have made and what are the expectations over the next few years. Our guest has been none other than Mike Kiswili, who is a trustee of the National Fund for Disabled of Kenya, and he says, and I want to take this home with me, that persons with disability are not a liability. persons with disability are not a liability. We need to change our perception for inclusivity and moving forward. You're still watching KBC Channel 1. I'm Regina. Manyara. Stay tuned.